Welcome to Portals, where we endeavor to bring to life perceptions and practices that help us make sense and resiliently lead through the shift underway with purpose, balance, and well-being. We are seeking to grow the community as organically as possible. If you are enjoying this content and getting value from it, would love it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel and help us get the word out by sharing this content with friends you think will find Portals valuable and enriching. The Portal's propulsion in every domain we explore is that we seek to appreciate what is emerging. Today we are inquiring into activism. What is activism? What could the place of art be inside the evolution of activism going forward? And what are the ways we can be activated to bring about change? We are joined by three next generation leaders. And next generation leaders are simply people who are aspiring to influence and shape what is arising. A core premise that guides us is that the coming decades will bring about transformative change in every aspect of society, in every core domain of the global scenery, and anyone really endeavoring in small and or in large ways to influence and shape the change is potentially a next generation leader, because we need this from the ground up change in local places, in endeavors that emerge in all sorts of domains and spaces, all as part of what is unfolding in the coming decade or two. So let me ask you, each one of you, to perhaps introduce yourself by way of offering a brief story as a context to what shaped your point of view and your passion and your approach to change and transformation. Athena, perhaps we can begin with you because you proposed that we explore this idea of activism.
Thank you very much, Aviv. So this idea of activism is it's a very interesting one, and I think it has perhaps never been more pressing or on all of our radar. And I think where I'm at right now has a relatively recent origin story. I started collaborating with my mother, who's a filmmaker, on a story on and off 5 years ago, which led us to a very unusual place. And it's a story that is in some way the seed of why we have gathered today, because the main character is a young woman who is facing a lot of the questions that my generation is facing, among which what is our activism? What are the possibilities of activism? What are the different ways of engaging in activism? What qualifies individually as activism? And it is a story which is very engaged with the ocean, our relationship to the ocean, and the way in which we have been taking from the ocean incessantly, and wishing to discover what relationship with the ocean, something a bit more balanced, might be. And as part of this, my mother and I decided we needed to get to know the ocean better. And our somewhat unusual approach to this was to embark on a 2-month voyage on a sailed vessel to be in the heart of things, not just get to know the ocean from the shore, which is most of our experience of the ocean. And our choice was a sailed cargo vessel. And so this brought in a second element. So we had the question of our relationship to the ocean, and then becoming familiar with this sailed cargo movement, which is not that new, but it is growing. I started to become more aware than ever of the shipping industry, which is really this invisible industry. We see planes flying over, we know things fly around the globe, but most people don't see these enormous container ships that are constantly plowing through the oceans. And that is how most of the goods that we purchase are transported. It is still the cheapest, though not the fastest, but certainly the cheapest way for goods to be transported, mostly because they can burn the cheapest and crudest form of oil. So there's a whole environmental question there. And this really led me to reflect upon purchasing power and the choices that we can make as individuals. So these elements combined into a voyage on this ship, the Aventure, a 2-month voyage that ended up being 7 for various reasons, mostly this pandemic we will just live through. And I came out the other side, I wouldn't say a new person, but many things were revealed to me. Many things changed inevitably. For one, living on a ship with 14 other people it's a microcosm of society. And everybody learns so much because you have to resolve conflicts immediately. You have to learn how to work together. A ship does not sail unless everybody collaborates. We were very aware of the waste we were producing because there was no way to dispose of it. So all of this was happening. And since our voyage was unexpectedly extended, I became incredibly aware of how little I needed in terms of possessions. I had packed the basics for 2 months, and then I had to extend that for 7 months. And yes, things broke, but you repaired them, and you discovered that pretty much everything could be fixed with a needle and thread and a bit of patience and a different aesthetic. So that was a very formative experience for me in terms of all of these elements, including climate. And the last part of this story that I would like to share with you was a very unexpected one. And I'll keep it brief because it has a lot of elements to it. But essentially, we were sailing on this mission zero, putting in our effort and our time to suggest that there's another way of doing things, that we can still transport things around the globe, but it might take longer. And do you change those choices if they don't show up tomorrow? If you don't just click buy now on Amazon and it shows up at your door 2 hours later, will we make choices differently? So that's what has brought me to this point today, with an increasing sense of urgency, of responsibility, of question marks on the horizon, which apply to everybody. And not just my generation. I look at the generation coming up and think, my goodness, if I have these questions now, what questions do they have? So I was delighted when Aviv suggested that we address this topic, not only this topic, but with Ofer and Enrique, who are 2 very, very dear friends of mine and whose thoughts and reflections I always value. So that's where I am.
Yeah, it's brilliant to hear you, Athena. I'll be happy to share a bit my background and what brought me here. I think what mostly led me to to an active to take active roles in the small and in the medium, small, and a bit bigger. I think it's always been art. I think I've been always be guided by an artistic urge to create and to imagine. Something from what you were mentioning, Athena, about your work with your mother on this film, actually reminded me about the power of art to allow you to embody, I think, something rather than only intellectually thinking about it. So in your way, in your case, was the ocean. The ocean was I mean, for me, it's almost a concept because I've been living close to the sea in Italy, but it's not the ocean. So even that, the ocean is more like a concept. But so if I want to save the ocean now, what I can do is probably to sustain, support the association that deal with the pollution in the ocean, or just join newsletters that let me know about it. But actually living inside the ocean for close by the ocean for 7 months, I think that's really allows you to integrate that universe and creates a relation. You create a relation with it, and I think in some way, art to me does this. Does acts like this, like a sort of a portal for integration through a portal of integration, basically, of any topics that you might be interested or passionate about. I think, yes, I'm very passionate about visual arts and music. So in one way, when I play or when I draw something, I try to connect to whatever something it's in my mind, and trying to, and the practice of drawing and creating is a way to integrate the subject. Um, what so more in specific, what I'm really trying to do with my art and my work is actually it's to find ways that can help people to connect to themselves, and to maybe to create a space of reflection in without imposing a solution or an answer. So I love to play with symbols, both musically and with lyrics, and or with imagery, um, that can open a space that can then be used uh, by listeners, by uh, art passionates, maybe to kind of dive into it, and maybe to stimulate some reflection. But in a way, my way of approaching art is never too specific, in the sense that it's not. Again, I don't try to kind of take a subject and try to explain it or to solve the subject. I love to kind of leave it that openness, because I think that an important part is the active, the listener or the viewer plays an active role in, in the fruition of art. Uh, and in a way, I think this is this passion, this aspect specifically, um, connects to activism to me, in the sense that because people, the way we need to, probably, I believe that the way we might, uh, the only way to change the world is to actually, everyone needs to kind of come on from their own spot, from their own take of responsibility, rather than being led only by an idea, external idea. So it's a bit, I hope that unites with what my position today.
While you were speaking, I was thinking a little bit about what identities we share among the three of us, or the four of us, that also inform the conversation today. And some of the identities that I know, at least, about the people in the room, that we all share kind of appreciation and curiosity towards languages. So we are fascinated by languages. We speak several of them. We have curiosity towards symbolism and towards how languages emerge and what they enable between people. We also share love towards the arts, and we use arts as a strong medium in our practices, whether it's in music or visual filmmaking and painting, so all sorts of art. And then I think another common identity maybe that we each express in our own way is some kind of being a true researcher, so allowing oneself a space to be in an exploration of what this life has to offer and what are different ways in which we can live. So if I think about Athena, that was on a cargo for almost over half a year, and has the courage to be very flexible in how she lives and where, and whether it's Enrique that found himself building your own garden in Switzerland and creating a community and living in all sorts of communal elements, and whether it's me that I'm also kind of a traveler and finding myself in different places and trying different also ways. So I think that's something that also inform, I think, our curiosity towards the topic of activism and how you embody in your own reality sort of a statement or an intention towards this life and how we can be in this life and how can we be useful for our surroundings. And in the end, it comes down to some kind of a courage or a push towards trying to express in our small universes and with our surrounding and our ideas of what human life can offer and be. And maybe another useful kind of piece of information, and I know that I'm taking a bit of time now, but I feel like our identities are actually relevant for the conversation today because they inform very much our perspective. And when speaking about activism, perspective is becoming very important. And I think that another piece that we share is the fact that we met actually working together with youth, with younger people, and trying to create spaces or to imagine together spaces for the young so that they can be themselves and be the best version of themselves and interact in a humane way that takes down or try to shake off a lot of the limitations that are often found in our societies. So that's kind of some pieces of threads of what connects us and what brings us also to the conversation today. And I hope that my interpretation or the weaving of these identities are doing justice with the two of you.
So building on what you are sharing, let me ask two questions and let you lead with any of the above that feels right for you. First question is, what are the inquiries that are alive for you at this time about the space of activism? And second, what is it you appreciate about activism in the way it expresses itself and in the way that you've seen it in the world? So please.
That's a brilliant question. I think what inspires me about this topic, and I think what actually propelled this meeting that we're doing today, is finding a sort of a new side to look at the issue of activism and figuring out how can we actually integrate it in our lives in a way that is sustainable and that it's coherent, with the natural way of living. Because I believe that let's imagine the world as a paradise. Even if let's imagine, like, for a moment, how would be like the world in a state of absolute paradise, and what does it even mean? So, would activism be there or not? Would it be any need for activism? I really don't know. I really don't know, but what comes in my mind is that maybe actually we are meant to actually, it's natural, it's a natural part of human life on earth to kind of to evolve and to bring farther society or the human life itself on the planet. And but I'm considering, therefore, also, let's stay in this image of paradise. How would activism look like in a paradise-like situation? How would it present itself? What kind of actions we would need to do, or what kind of yeah, I'm just curious about this vision, and but and this helps me, maybe will help us, maybe also to kind of have a better idea of how to help and support the hundreds and millions of initiatives that we see around the world now. I mean, there are beautiful examples of attempts to make this world a better place. And I think they are not only coming from a standpoint of everything is looking very bad, we need to kind of fix all this. I think they're also taking inspiration to a sort of vision, and a sort of yeah, an image of an ideal maybe of how the future, how such of this initiative uh, imagine the world to be like in the future.
So, yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Enrique. So I asked two questions. What are the inquiries that are alive in you about the space of activism? And what do you appreciate about activism? And what you have done beautifully is you're saying, let's imagine an ideal utopian, or I don't know that you use this word, but a paradise. And let's say that most of the beautiful agendas have been realized. What would then activism look like and do in a world like that, which is certainly something that will push us or pull us to consider an out of the box or out of the paradigm way of thinking into this space. So Athena, where would you want to lead with? What do you appreciate first, and also what are the inquiries that are alive for you about activism?
Well, I will jump on to Enrique's wonderful imagination of a paradise. Where is activism in a paradise? And to answer the first part of that question, and I would imagine that one of the strongest elements of activism is actually uniting people around their passions, uniting people around something they deeply care about. And so I appreciate that about activism in our world. And I could imagine that in the paradise, that people would still unite around their passions and what they believe in deeply. And it wouldn't necessarily mean fighting for or fighting against anything, but it would be bringing people together. Yeah.
So you're really beginning to frame activism as an impulse, as an energy, as a transformative energy that shapes society, rather than the narrower definition of activism as people demonstrating in the street. Although we're not excluding that, you are seeing, you're painting the impulse of activism in a broader context. Ofer, where would you go with this initial inquiry?
So, I think, if we look at the definition of activism, it goes beyond protesting. It goes to the idea of coming together with the wish to intervene and change society towards a perceived better future in some way. And from that vantage point, I think there is something very beautiful about activism. Also, even if we think about our institutions, so it is kind of this making a stance and being in a conversation between the people and the institutions that are there to serve the people. So it's also a form of or the liberation, and in that sense, I have a lot of appreciation towards activism, and at the same time, and I would be happy to explore this together. I sometimes have the feeling that that some of the expression of activism today, I'm careful with my words because I'm sensing that activism is something that we take very personally. So I'm feeling this hesitation towards how to bring up this feeling of, okay, we go to a protest and then we go home and we don't embody the things that we're protesting for. So there is an implementation gap that I notice also in myself. So maybe being active causes me to feel good, but without necessarily afterwards following through and making all the changes in my life. So I have some questions around what are new ways to be active, or what are more ways. And maybe I want also in this conversation to have allowance to explore without offending anyone. And this is a fear that I have a little bit towards the conversation, maybe.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, so let me try and offer a few thoughts and then maybe lead into a certain broad framework and then get your thoughts and develop the conversation within that. Often when we just use the word activism, people will go in their minds to the large demonstrations that they've recently watched on TV. So some people may think about Extinction Rebellion. Some people may think back to Occupy Wall Street a little earlier in time, and people that have been on this planet for longer will go all the way back to the anti-war demonstration at the time of the Vietnam War. So, and I think what we are saying today is activism goes much beyond that, but I think we first want to be appreciative and inquire what is it we can appreciate about that. And for example, if you just for a moment focus on Extinction Rebellion, one of the recent large demonstration, if you look carefully at what they've done is you've got to, whether you agree with their approach or with their agenda or not, you've got to be respectful and appreciative of the commitment and the professionalism with which they approach what they've done, because one of their objectives was to make a news story that will make the cover, the front page of the leading publications and will be a top item, will be picked up as a top news item on BBC and other channels and such. So they actually approached this quite scientifically and said, how many people do we need to, what they said was, how many people do we need to have arrested such that it will actually make it to a news item? And then once they calculated how many people they need to have arrested, they said, what is it we need to do to actually get that number of people arrested? Because that will ultimately get to be the news story that we want it to be. So you've got to be respectful that they've approached it in a scientific way. Now, if you then say, but they have not achieved their objectives because policy has not been changed, I don't think that would be right. Their objective was not, it wasn't in the cards for them to immediately change policy. They were driving to get people's attention, to let the public sentiments and point of view shape policy changes. And I think it's important that we see it in that context. If you go back to Occupy Wall Street, they didn't get to change and shape the policy choices in America, but some of the people that were involved in this experience, because of the distributed culture that emerged in the time of Occupy Wall Street, they became then very active in the distributed leadership movement, all the way it is evolved into blockchain and the broader social experiments around that. So what I'm saying is that there are more ways to appreciate the impact of activism than did they actually drive the immediate policy change, which is often not realistic. Let me pause here and see if any of what I said brings up anything for you that you want to respond to.
Something come from what you were saying. The sense of the word, actually, the expression milestone. Some of the experience, activistic experiences that you mentioned probably caused collectively and socially a milestone that worked as a sort of a reference point for the changing of some change that had happened in the future. So the efforts that happened around that the event, certain events, allowed like sort of an anchor point from which then some actual change can happen. So yeah, also another thing that came in mind is the fact of an appreciation on activism, on certain form of activism today, is actually the idea of breaking through sort of a wall. So there is the need to actually cause some shock, some form of shock towards things that need to change. So yeah, from this sense, I wonder how to create that shock in a, well, I don't know, in a constructive way, or in a way that is sustainable.
If you reflect historically through the 20th century, you see that the capacity to bring about social change through demonstration is actually decreasing. So in 1930, when Gandhi led the Salt March, they could be engaged in this exercise and really draw global attention. And even in the early and mid-60s, when the anti-war demonstrations in the United States and around the world then were catalyzed, that was a 12 years effort, 12 years sustained effort with peaks. And in this environment, we are likely to see activism showing up now in a very different way. So we can't really measure it against that. And I think that's the value of inquiring through your experience and where you see your passions and your energy and the conversations that you have with others in your networks, where the creative energy of wanting to impact and lead to change, how is it expressing itself? So that's the essence of our inquiry.
Yes, and I think that's really what has brought us together today, because intuitively I think there is a feeling that the old model of taking to the streets is less effective for whatever reason, whether it is our digital reality or the way media is used. And so I think there's an increasing disenchantment with that model, or almost the futility of that model. And I think that is what is pushing us to unpack how else can this be done. And speaking of my own network, I mean, I have some friends who are involved in very interesting projects that are often very specific, whether it is, in pressuring institutions such as public institutions, such as a national theatre or a museum to divest from oil sponsorship, and doing that in creative ways such as coming in and performing versions of Shakespeare. And that way, I don't know, it's something I've reflected upon also with the protesting model. And I think I brought it up in our preparation for this conversation is, if you shout at people, do they listen? My feeling is they're less likely to. So what are the other ways of communicating in a world where we are bombarded with information? What are the ways of communicating effectively?
What it brings me to mind is I have this sense also looking around me of going back to actually thinking globally but acting locally. That there is a strong need right now to embody activism in tangible actions. I mean, there is the desire. I mean, we digitalized so much. We are capable of doing so much new things. And then I also meet it a lot in my work when I engage with others. I see a strong need to go back into creating with one hand, to feel the process, to have a connection with, okay, this is the fruit that I'm eating, but I know how it is that I can eat it now because I put the seed in the ground and I saw the tree grows, and I saw, so going back to processes that are comprehensible to us, and maybe there is a clue in that also activism asks now to have also these more local expressions, because this is it's kind of, there is something very natural about you taking action or a stand towards something that you care about, and also seeing the fruits of your work, of your stance. And when it goes to this bigger system, the causal link between what you do and the effects of it becoming very, very loose, and therefore also making it hard for us to appreciate somehow.
Yeah, what's coming up for me is the recognition that we cannot separate the impact of activism from the broader context, and how the shift from the ideological age of the early mid-20th century through to modernity and post-modernity, and the cynical nature of post-modernity, and the deconstructive element of post-modernity, of how that in a way by itself disempowered and broke down some of that energy and its ability to impact. So where my thought was on the lead to today, I developed some time to clarify my thinking. I'd go to inquire and build some slides. Let me bring it up and see how we play with this. The first definition I wrote down for activism for myself, and I wanted to think about it, was, okay, what are we actually talking about? So I said, I think we are talking about using action to catalyze transformative results. So then I look at this and say, well, but what's the essence? What really is the point here? And it led me to, can I come up with an even shorter definition? And the shorter definition is catalyzing transformation. So then I contemplated for a bit. Activism is about catalyzing transformation. And then I came to the realization that it's actually reversed, that the two concepts should be reversed, because catalyzing transformation is the first principle, right? Catalyzing transformation is the first principle, and activism is just one way, or what we recognize in what we have so far spoken about activism by way of demonstrating, is just one way to achieve it. So then I ask, what are the other ways to catalyze transformation? And the two questions that come up are, what do you hope to transform? And how do you hope to bring about that transformation? So that's the contemplation I stayed with for a bit. And where that led me was to reflect on the three social spaces, the three activity spaces, where you can imagine the paradise that Enrique started with and the circles of passion that Athena, you're describing. And those are, it's the idea that really, if you look at society, you will see three different spaces of activity: the political space, the economic space, the cultural space. This is an insight that initially was framed by Rudolf Steiner with his work after the First World War. He was asked by some people in Germany, could he offer a framework to facilitate the transformation of society? And essentially he said, look, and he called this the threefolding. It became the threefolding movement, but it never really got off the ground. And the essence of his idea and why it is relevant for us in this conversation was that the political space, policy and government, the economic space, the space of business, the cultural space, the art, the science, the religion and education and the media, they each need to be in a healthy society. In Enrique's paradise, the three are emerging individually. And they should be given the freedom to express their passions and their interests in as independent a way as possible, where the unifying essence is equality and freedom for all, and each of the three spaces is emerging independently of itself. The reason we are speaking today, I believe, is because we are at an end of the 80 or the 100-year cycle where those three spaces have reached an intractable lock, where they are very much locked in each other, where the political space is captured by the economic space, and the political agenda is captured by a cultural agenda, or you could say the political agenda has captured the cultural agenda, rather than the three actually emerging independently. And I actually believe we have already entered the breakdown or the release. We are in the early stages of the release of the 80 to 100 year cycle, when the powers to be, the power gets concentrated with very small cross-section of society, and the political elite, the economic elite, and somewhat the influencer of cultural elite. In our context, it will, for example, be Hollywood. They very much are converging in the seat of power, and what you expect is that the coming decade or two in this story of change will lead to a new release of power. Now, we are in that cycle of release probably early in the conversation. And so it would not be surprising, Athena, that you say, I feel somewhat, we don't have a model to influence. What's a way to influence the agenda? Because the cycle right now and where we are is these three spaces are still very locked in each other. There isn't a freedom for them to emerge independently. And so then I did one more step. I said, let's step back from this threefolding model, and let's look at truly independently of any limiting definition. What are the different paths to effect change and transformation? And I painted 8, came up with 8. You may add to the list. But I thought that would at least open for us the arena in the broadest possible way to think about change and transformation. So the first is, you may say, I have a passion for how society and how the world should look like, and therefore I'm going to go into politics and government. And you may lead into any of the 3 branches of government, the first, second, third estates, the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch. This is, by the way, a mini play on threefolding, the idea of the separation of those 3. Or you may say, I don't feel that that's a space where I can impact change, so I'm going to go into business and I'm going to lead by innovation, or I'm going to lead an aspirational business agenda, or I'm going to build a B Corp, and Ofer may educate us a little more about the way of that movement and what benefit corporations and what they bring to the world. That's another path for change and for transformation. The third is, you may say, I don't see a way to impact the world through government and through business. I'm going to dedicate myself to the non-profit world, to NGO work, and anything else that would qualify in that space. And then, of course, the fourth lane is, many people feel that the way to impact change is to tell the truth, to bring the truth, the story of what is occurring in the world, and they lead themselves into media. And in this framework, I only came to activism as number 5. But the point I was realizing as I was thinking about this, you could be an activist in any of those spaces. And I think the particular energy of our conversation today was in your suggestion that there is a way to actually integrate the 6th path with the 5th one, where you can bring art into activism. I added in this framework also 7 and 8, which is, you may say, there is a way to, in the long term, impact change through education and through religion. But that's the kind of framework that I found in my own inquiry. And the one last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you comment on all this, is let's just recognize that you can truly be an activist in any of these spaces. What just happened in the US with the Supreme Court is an example of an activist agenda by people that you may disagree with their set of values, but what you have there is 50 years of focused activist agenda of some of the conservative side of society and the federalist society and so on, driving with discipline to place conservative judges on the court and the Supreme Court to impact and drive their set of values. So that's an example of a very activist, committed agenda driven through the judicial side of the government. And you can disagree, you can be very upset, you can even hate what they represent, but you've got to be respectful of their discipline and their commitment to their cause. That's at least when we look at this from a dispassionate place. You've got to come up with that appreciation, even if you vehemently disagree with their agenda. So let me pause here and let you play jazz and comment on this in any way you feel is relevant and constructive.
I think it's a very interesting list, and I would agree with it in general. What I think interests me is that, yes, activism is a path, and there are some people who dedicate their lives to that. And I suppose what I'd like to engage with is, I think activism is and should be available to everybody. And in fact, I think it's absolutely essential that it is not there, that there is not that separation. That well, you're an activist, I'm not. I'm an artist. I do my thing. And I think that's where I would return to my idea of urgency. I think it is no longer a choice. I think it's no longer optional to be active, to take action.
Can you say more about when you say that it's no longer a choice? What's in you about this? Where from do you say that?
I suppose the main topic that is on my mind is the rapid acceleration of climate change. There are many topics about which we can care deeply and take action, but I think the topic that is facing all of us, whether we care about it or not, is what's happening to our planet. And that's where I think complacency is no longer an option. I think passivity or hoping somebody else will do something about it is no longer an option.
So I hear this, Athena, you're saying unless something different occurs in the coming decade or two, this planet is cooked. There is no future. You're not saying that explicitly, but that's what I'm hearing in your voice. Some people will say it's been said now for 2 or 3 or 4 decades. But is that the implication, or do you mean something else?
Yes, I think that's the implication. I mean, it's not breaking news by any means. I know Greta Thunberg showed up at Glastonbury the other day, and many people's reaction was, yes, we know, we've heard this before, you're preaching to the choir. Maybe I'm not saying the planet is cooked. I'm saying our life, the way we're used to living on this planet, our presence on this planet might be cooked. The planet's not going anywhere. We might be. And if we wish to continue to be in relationship with this environment, and this is a funny thing. A lot of these protests I've attended, people carry banners saying, save the planet, save the earth. And I'm not sure that's what it comes down to. It is maybe more about changing our perspective. We are not here to save the earth. We need to change the way we interact with the earth so that we can continue to exist here and coexist here.
It's interesting because what you're saying, what it causes in me is also to think, I mean, it comes down to reasoning, why is it even important that we are here? Why we have this push, why we even care? I mean, you could say, well, it's not going to happen in our lifetime. Why this continuity of our society, of the next generation? Why it's important? And I think that's true to activism at large. This urge to try to make things better from the vantage point of what you deem better to be. It comes down to reasoning some kind of meaning or purpose, or finding a reason that will motivate you to act. And I'm curious a little bit to hear maybe like what are your personal reasons to act?
Ofer, can I just before Athena responds to that, perhaps, given your experience and your passion and reflection on the work you do, where would you place, given the framework that I offered, the idea of business and NGO work and B Corp? Can you offer a comment to this broader idea of embracing activism through other channels other than the historic context of demonstration?
Yes. So the reason that you're asking me about B Corp is that I recently attended a conference of this certification body, um, because my um, my own consultancy where I work is now in the process of certifying as B Corp, which actually raises also a lot of critical discussions internally, because it's always a question of each certification body has their standards that you need to comply with. But then if it becomes kind of a checklist that you just do what the standards require you to do, then it can also be actually in your way of acting. So we were discussing internally if it's even good for us to be certified, so we are not becoming too comfortable with what we do, but we actually want to push ourselves even more. And also during this conference, you really see that the interpretation of businesses as to what is activism and what you feel comfortable with, it's on a spectrum. And I can relate to that because it's also in my personal life, the extent of activism that I'm doing, it's on a spectrum. And I think that there is much more that I could probably embody. But more broadly, I think that it did give me hope to see that it's very much in the conversation. So the sentiment, the intention of businesses to say, okay, we have to really dig how we transform our processes, our construction, our business goal. How do we integrate and really create something that is more holistic regarding this notion of activism? That it doesn't need to be just kind of a title that you add, sustainable finance, but that finance in itself becomes sustainable because all the framework that you're operating in integrates our society, integrates other stakeholders that are not only related to profit and your shareholders. So really living new frameworks and finding them together as a community of businesses or community of NGOs. And it's there is a lot of unlearning that is related to that, actually.
What is the most hopeful element of this movement for you? Where do you see the most cutting edge and the most hopeful energy? And the reason I'm asking again, because when you take the individual perspective as Athena offered, it can be very overwhelming and disempowering. What can the individual do? But what you're describing is that in the organizational, the business context, there are some levels that are perhaps impactful. So where is the greatest hope for you when you look at that movement?
It can be done. Let's say we always look at the barriers to making things better, and we say, no, we have to consider, we have to balance all these things. And actually, in the end, it comes down to if you have a strong board that is with you and has this vision, you can start tomorrow to pay living wages. Yes, it will have consequences. It will have impact maybe on your business, but it can be done. And actually, that these businesses can also be even more successful. And I'm careful. I don't think that's the reason to do that. That shouldn't be what drives activism. You need to do it because it's right to do it. But there shouldn't be any excuses, because we see already demonstrations, like live businesses, that it works, that they're taking action that was considered to be crazy or frowned upon, and they're actually making it a reality. So this gives me hope, because I just hope that when more and more individuals that are in this power position understand that and stop giving excuses why not, and stop seeing in the negative but start seeing in the positive, then it can gain traction. And this is how change happens, when you have more and more local demonstrations.
Yeah, that's absolutely great to hear, actually, what Ofer was saying. She mentioned a word about change, I don't remember exactly the word, but it's something around change in the perspective. Which so I went I straight away I went to look at art in that sense and language. I think there are two things very connected. Um, I think some of the challenges that we are facing actually are due to the way we are used to look at things, to do business, to do economics, to do politics. So, and the way we look at things is through language. It's basically how we name things, how we're used to name things, how we're used to consider things. Came in my mind the fact of I live in a sort of a neighborhood in which there are different families sort of cohabit in the same spot, and so it's interesting to how quickly how actually automatic is my way of thinking of the neighborhood, like as they're just neighbors, but that's not true. I mean, they're neighbors, they're humans, they're potential friends, they're potential um, partners on business, they're potential. I mean, it's up to you what they can become. But if you get stuck on the definition of neighbors, then there's a whole bunch of Hollywood movies that explains what neighbor is. So I wonder what's the and but also there's nice movies that show what neighbors can become. And it's about you. It's about the way you take in consideration your active role on transforming relationships or transforming the potential of your neighborhood. Uh, so yeah, just a few thoughts about language, about consideration, about shifting paradigms, uh, and how easy at the end it is. Of course, not easy, but it is a matter of a small change. Actually, you're you're very very close to do that shift if you want to.
The power of imageries and the language we use in terms of all the actions we take in the world come out of those, and if you're able to catalyze, tell a new story, compel people to see a new imagery, then that in itself can be a powerful catalyst for change. Athena, do you want to come on any of this and or respond to the invitation from Ofer about, so what is that personal sense of urgency, or anything else really?
I really like this idea. Well, Enrique put forward some interesting ideas. The first one, of course, is language and how we label things and how that influences our response to them. I mean, for example, in this context, the difference between climate change and climate emergency, very different perceptions can come out of that. But I also like this idea of neighbors, and to extrapolate upon that, not just the potential of what these neighbors could be, but that even if you don't really talk to your neighbors, you still have a relationship with them, and they are in your proximity. And if you need something, you'll probably go knock on your neighbor's door. And to think, maybe, would we act differently? Could we act differently if we think about what else neighbors could mean? I mean, I could have a neighbor that's an oak tree, or I could have a neighbor that's a neighboring country, and I could have neighbors that are refugees. And what does a word like that imply in terms of relationship, and does it make us feel differently?
Yeah, my build on this idea you're introducing, Enrique, that now Athena is building on the sense of how do we configure our view of the world, the perspective we bring, and where I see the unlock power in relation to activism. Here is something that I see. We have groups all around the world who feel passionately committed to the cause that they represent. So I completely am in alignment and I'm recognizing, Athena, the urgency for climate change. And I can tell a story about that through the eyes of my granddaughter. What is the world that she will grow into? But I also see that there is a legitimacy in the people that feel that unless we change the economic paradigm, we can never change the climate paradigm. And you'll have people that will argue robustly and logically that unless you change the incentive structure and the paradigm of haves and have-nots and so on, then unless you unlock a new economic paradigm, there is no way to truly drive policy and behavior that will change the energy equation and therefore climate. And then you'll have a third group. And the third group will say, well, we stand no chance to change the economic paradigm unless we address social justice. And they will passionately address that no change agenda can begin unless you truly address grievances of the past, because we're carrying a scar tissue and a distorting influence into society that will never allow a new formation of any holistic paradigm. And they feel very strongly about that point of view, and they will refuse to engage with any change agenda unless that is the number one issue. And then you bring a fourth group, and the fourth group will address that unless we change the feminine and masculine balances and energy in society, in the way it expresses itself in the society, the socio-economic paradigm, then nothing really can be done, because the power for change, the energy for change, can be unlocked through the reciprocity of a new holistic engagement of what the masculine and the feminine energy represent. So I see all those four perspectives. What I often see is that none of these perspectives, when people represent those perspectives, there isn't necessarily the readiness, not in all circumstances, but often there isn't the readiness to embrace all other change agenda. And I, by the way, appreciate it and understand it, because in the example, Athena, you gave, which is powerful, I think if I read the story correct, the moral of the story, you have few people who were so committed to focus on particular cultural institutions and their sponsoring money from the oil industry and impacting that change. The lesson there is you can't drive all change agendas. You actually need to be focused on a particular agenda with laser focus, or else you get dispersed. So I'm offering this challenge for us. How can you be focused in what you actively do and develop the perspective to embrace the bigger picture? I see Ofer wants to come on this.
So I think what you're describing is it comes down to the fact that we have different theories of change in our mind, of how do we connect point A to B, and what is this journey that we need to do in order to change. And another thing that you're pointing out is the tendency of humans to gather in groups and have a very strong in-group and out-group mentality, meaning that you identify with your own community, so with the specific theory of change that you prescribe to or find attractive, and that also causes you to reject and exclude other points of view. And I think we've reached the point, and this is a bit the urgency that Athena is also voicing, that these practices of exclusion, of in-group and out-group mentality, of thinking that of even like being so arrogant to say that we know what is the right theory of change. This is what we kind of need to unlearn in order to transcend to another possibility, which is we are all working with the same intention to create a better environment, and therefore we can be a bit more forgiving or more accepting towards this out-groups mentality, so people that appreciate the world in a different way and therefore have a different theory or understanding of how change can come about, and focus on actually bringing it about, each one in his own sphere, each one with their own understanding of how.
Yeah, I was actually considering what Ofer was saying, and I totally agree. I can only say this.
Well, what I'll say is implicit in what Ofer begins to paint is the fifth change theory, which is the developmental change theory. Implicit in what you're saying is we've got to have the capacity to embrace different theories of change in a way that's inclusive, and that is somewhat the developmental approach to change. And you'd see that with the people that say, rightly so, well, all the crises we see out there, the planet heating and all other crises, they are an expression of our projection of ourselves. So we need to change on the inside, and we need to learn to take inside those different perspectives and unlock change there. That is a legitimate invitation, important invitation. Or would you frame it differently, Ofer?
No, I would understand, and I mean, I would agree. And as you were kind of reflecting back some of the things that I was saying and adding from your own, it also made me think about being my own devil's advocate. And I saw this; it triggered in me saying, "But yes, but some theories of change are better than others. We can't be accepting towards everything because." And noting that this voice also comes up, and I think that's also true. So we need to be careful also, I mean, with not being too safe. So also creating an environment that is inclusive and is accepting other theories of change, and still kind of being on this cutting edge of challenging each other. So we are holding each other accountable for doing enough, or for questioning our own understanding and biases and all of that. So I think also having this brave space between us humans, communities, different theories of change, in order to push one another and to grow from it, that's also important. But it has to be with this. I think it's like we cannot reproduce war in how we are with each other, especially with groups that on the general level have share similar intentions. So, I mean, it's like you can create a many level of abstractions, and in the end of it, appreciate the humanity of everybody. But then, of course, there are some things that we want to push against, and this is what I find difficult. Because if you tell me now, well, I have to work towards change, I can be inclusive towards communities that have similar idea of how we should change, or what is the vision, where are we going? But if the vision of where we're going is completely on the other spectrum than mine, then I would be able to keep the sentiment that those are people that really believe in what they're doing. And I will not go as far as fighting them on that level of them truly, I know it's like almost with religion, I know that they are truly believing that this is the good that we should walk towards, but I will definitely argue with them on the objective, on the vision that they have, because I would disagree. So this is the balances of what we're speaking about. Because no, I mean, if we look now at the United States, I cannot support preventing women from having access to safe abortion. And at the same time, I am willing to say, I know that people that are working towards the cause of preventing this access to care, they truly believe somehow that this is the right thing to do, and they truly believe in that. And this is the tensions that we're dealing with. How do I keep the appreciation towards them being, people that have share the same humanity as mine, and at the same time have a very different understanding towards the vision of what is right and what is wrong?
Yeah, similar conflict is arising in the country you come from, because in Israel as well, there is a conservative, religious, orthodox line in society that wants to drive an agenda that is in conflict with the other side of society. So we are now at the point in the conversation. It took us all that time, an hour and something, to get to this place that you frame the need to have a brave space where we truly are open to inclusively argue, stretch the different theories of change, and be open to appreciate the different theories of change that the other person is articulating, and be prepared to be changed in the conversation. I think that we are now in this space. So I'm now inviting more on this and into this, please, Athena or Enrique, because the point Ofer just made with us was, when you look at the different agendas, what underlies those, a different theory of change. And that is the space we are in. And somebody can say, I don't have a theory of change, I just want this change. Well, that's just another theory of change.
That's brilliant question, and brilliant challenge, hard one. My first question is, I mean, that you already responded to it, but do a theory of change exist? Do a theory of everything? Because in a way, I'm doing a step back, because it's a bit easier to not go into the heat of the thing, but I'm considering about. I'm looking at. I'm really interested about forests, for example, how complex ecosystems solve a problem by actually being super specific and hyper specific, but at the same time being completely connected to all and every other organism in the forest. This kind of system, in a way, is what I hope to see happening in our society. And in some extent, this ecosystem needs to allow mistakes, needs to allow enemies to kind of pop up, or in the case of a forest, mushrooms or specific insects that die, that need to die in order to feed something else, and then everything. So it's a hyper complexity that becomes an intelligence. And a certain extent, I think is required this kind of freedom also in our world. And here I'm doing my theory. So we're back into a theory. But what I'm saying is that I would love to not be needing to deal with these problems through theories, but rather through I don't know, but in a way, it's probably is listening, probably is keep listening, and questioning. I think in this group, I mean, Tina and Ofer really excellent questioners. I mean, they really are able to see the problem and question and to kind of stop if certain things don't fit. As you were saying, I mean, about, for example, the current state of affairs in America or the state of affairs in Israel, we need to, of course, create some breaks, some no's, but at the same time, how? That's the question. So yeah, just to put it in there and to share this part of the vision.
I love this forest theory. It sounds like a beautiful place to live. Let's all be trees. Let's all be a forest. But I would love to run with this, and partially in response to your open question, Enrique, bring this back to activism and say, well, what can we do? We can have lots of theories. We can talk about it. There's a very trendy word these days, being woke, being aware of situations. And there's an Irish pop singer who wrote one very powerful song. It's called Nina Cried Power. And one of the refrains is, or one of his lines is, it's not the waking, it's the rising. And that has really resonated with me in this whole topic as I've been grappling with it myself. Is I can talk about this, I can read about it, I can be incredibly aware. But the question I keep asking myself is, what am I doing about it? What am I doing about any of these things? This is why I would come back to the question that sparked all of this, and just have this as an open question: is what is your activism?
No, I love this because you're bringing exactly the energy of activism into the room. So this is exactly the push. Like, activism is not only about speaking. Sometimes you do it through media to communicate a message, but it's really about the doing. And yeah, and I think that's exactly the point, that now maybe it also goes to the what Kiko was saying about, okay, maybe we don't need to do activism through these theories, but maybe through this emergence of doing, of how can we each be a catalyzer for good, and demonstrate in our very existence the ideas and the theories, maybe, or not the theories, but just the sentiments that we share towards what is possible. And yeah, no, go ahead, I'm done.
Just came in mind the word manifestation. It's in English as well, right? The same. When you do a manifestation, activism. In activism, there's this word. At least in Italian, we say there is a manifestazione, and manifestation of what you wanna catalyze. So, which comes back to one thing that Aviv was mentioning before about the what comes first, action or catalyzation. So, and in a way, it's interesting to look back to look at it from the other way around. So first there's the catalyzation, and then there's the action, or so in a way. And yeah, I find it very interesting actually that even in today's activism ways, there's already actually this seed manifesting what you want the world to look like. Yeah, and sometimes though this manifestation, of course, in certain expression activism become actually polluted in a way, or diluted, loses a bit of the focus. So,
Athena, do you view your project as a form of activism? The movie project that you are developing?
Hopefully, yes. I would say yes.
So
and not only because of the topics that, I think because of the topics it touches upon, and the context it is involved in, but also the people we are engaging with to discuss these things, which quite appropriately both Offer and Enrique have very generously agreed to be some of our first readers. We only asked a few people, about 7 or 8 people, and we're getting their feedback on the first version of the script. So that kind of engagement in relevant contemporary topics, I think, could be a form of activism.
Because I appreciate the energy and the impatience and the urgency of what do we do, what do I do, the way you frame it to each one of us, beyond talking. But then when I think about Enrique's theory of change through the forest, the law of the forest says that every tree can only grow from its own roots. It can't look at another tree and say, I want to grow from the other tree's roots, even when all the trees in the forest help each other by the way they inform each other. So if I'm translating the message, we each have to begin where we are. And which brings up what some of you said earlier about the local energy of change. So I have another forest of story to share with you with a couple of more slides to assert a theory of change.
And I just want to add one thing about one thing that Athena said before, about just one example of how the movie that she's working with her mother and the way she approaches people, like for example in this case me and Offer something, when they sent us the script, so there was a specific instruction how to actually print down the script and not reading it through screen, and to actually note by hand things or by pencil directly on paper. And this actually, at first, they didn't say why they did that. That was interesting. I think they didn't say that, but they let us interpret this in our way. And I had my interpretation of that, and of course, probably as well, Offer, and yes, for me it was the idea of action. For example, in this case, get away from screen. That's one level. That stay away from screen and stay with the script and stay with the essence of the script itself. Stay with the essence of the story. So to avoid distraction and be with it, so that you can. But yeah, just to put it also this little detail there, I thought it was interesting to share it.
Yeah, that could certainly be one of. I mean, I can't say we thought through the many reasons behind this, but certainly to engage, for me to engage with a physical object, it's very different than to interface through screens, and we spend so much time and so much distracted time as well on screens. So yeah, that is a way of engaging, a different way of reflecting and having more quietness, perhaps, which allows for reflection in general as well as when reading the script.
This is something we've used a number of times. Obviously, it's integrally inspired. It's the idea of looking at Zone 1 as the space of personal development, Zone 2, collective development, Zone 3, the search for perceiving and seeing the truth, and Zone 4, impacting the world. So if you look at these through the lens of transformation and change, you'd say in Zone 1, I'm asking, how do I transform me? Zone 2, how do we transform us? Zone 3, how do we transform the sense-making process? And Zone 4 is where we transform reality. So then you say, okay, here are the 8 different paths we reflected on where you can express the energy of changing the world through politics, through business, through non-profit, through media, activism, art, education, and religion. But so if I try to inquire deeper into these 4 zones, it leads us to asking these questions. What am I doing and how am I transforming me? what and how are we transforming ourselves? In what ways and how will we update the sense making? This is where, Enrique, the point you made about symbols and the maps of meaning and the maps with which, the language with which we make sense, all that becomes very critical because it shapes our perceptions and shapes what we then do. And then in zone 4, what are the capabilities and systems we transform as a way to catalyze change? And if I want to concretize this and ask myself, so what can I concretely do, not as a theory of change, but as a practitioner of change in each of the 4 zones, it leads me to, okay, so these are 3 examples, and you can add many others. In zone 1, where am I prepared to practice forgiveness, to practice absolving trauma, to be regenerative? How am I releasing blockages in my world, in my relationships, in the various circumstances? Where can I unlock energy and creativity that will ultimately allow me to do whatever I want to do in a whole other way? Because we've seen that the people that lead change, often what you are captured by in the first place is the charisma, the energy that they bring to the table. In a similar way, when we talk about the zone 2, how do we raise the art of conversation to a whole new level? Where and how and with whom do we cultivate the communities of healing and well-being? How do we nurture pods of joint purpose? The beauty there is, so in the example of that you're doing with your mother, Athena, this is a project. In this case, the 2 of you are the pod, but you can have 3 or 4 people engaged in a project or a purpose that catalyzes the change because we have something to work on. This is both zone 2 and zone 4. Zone 3 is an interesting practice area. So I'd say, how do I cultivate first principle thinking and inquiry practices that allow us to embrace the challenges we are facing in a whole new way? What are some of the ways to truly cultivate and develop multi-perspectival capacities so we can look at those different challenges from different points of views? I think connecting the dots and fostering insightful storytelling, for me, the example you offered at the beginning, that you said we found ourselves for 7 months on the ocean. You're going to connect the dots through this experience because it becomes a visceral, embodied something, not just intellectual set of references. This is a compelling way to tell a story. And in the 4th zone, it is a challenging but attractive space. And you see it with people that are leading either in local endeavors, in cities, or you see the people that develop the technologies that will catalyze change. So prototyping alternative economic and communal models. Enrique, you're engaged with and shared with me that you've been involved in several communal models where the embracing the environment and how do we consume and make choices about collective spaces. That is the sense that a lot of that energy can only truly emerge in local spaces and the power of that. And then how do you galvanize and catalyze from local experiences some system approach and technological approaches and new technologies that will facilitate change that otherwise cannot be unleashed? And then where and how do you educate, mobilize, engage, and campaign? And I think the impulse that brought us together today was the recognition that art actually has a space, has an opportunity in each of those 4 spaces: the personal, the collective, the truth-seeking, and the impacting the world. That actually art is, in the way you described it earlier on, Enrique, is the impulse of change in the way it can emerge, and it has a place in each of the 4 spaces. If I want to contemplate, can I create for myself an imagery that will hold my focus, will hold my attention, and will allow me to unlock
energy of change and transformation, and then lead into these four spaces. So I don't know that this is a theory of change, in, to use your words, Ofer, but why I said this is a forest, I envision that these four spaces are co-arising. So I know we have only a few moments before Ofer needs to go. So please, any comments, any thoughts that come alive for you in this?
I find it a very rich map, a very rich theory. And it's true that the emergence of art through all the, I mean, in a way, I like to see art as a tool that, you know, that is not just in the space of art, in a gallery. Like, I think you can do it actually in yourself, you can do it collectively, you can do it as a sense-making tool and to impact the world somehow. So it's an interesting observation how art emerges from all these four spaces. But yeah, but I probably it deserves some kind of sitting on it and look at it and see what comes actually.
For a start, you would probably paint this differently and more effectively, and in a way that will engage us even better than the way I created this quickly on a slide, right?
Yes, that's a way. Actually, I could have fun and painted it somehow, some way. Yeah.
I think, as Enrique says, there is a lot to consider in this map that you've created. So I won't attempt to do that in the little time we have left, but I would just like to perhaps open up a little bit more this question of this idea of art and activism, which was one of our starting points we didn't quite get our teeth into, and just put that out to all of you and say, how does art interact with activism? Is art activism in its nature? There, you can cynically also say, well, what place does art have in any of this? You know, if the planet is burning and you're painting a picture, where are your priorities? And I've certainly encountered that perspective, and it's a very good counter. So yeah, I would just briefly open that up to you guys and say, what is the role of art in activism?
What I'm left with is, I think also this picture that you're painting, which is interesting because in a way that's also your way to be active. Like you are attracted to sense making and trying to observe and put into frameworks, and this is kind of your language of activism, while it might not be the same language of Atina or Enrique or myself. And I think that's the point. It comes down to each person, and that's also true for art. I think to find a medium, to find the space that where the passion lies, maybe, to integrate activism. I think more broadly, we all act, even if we are doing it deliberately or we're doing it by inaction or by just being. So we are acting, and maybe the sentiment here is to make this more deliberate, to make activism, to integrate activism in starting with one universe and then extending it to one's surrounding, of acting towards the vision that we have of what's possible. And I think art is, through history and now, it's still a very attractive medium because many can relate to it. It goes many times. It's not so much goes to our head, but it goes to our emotions, and it can activate because it's attractive and we can relate with it. So that's why I think art is central to activism, and at the same time, we all have our own mediums to do that from.
Well, so let me try and conclude today by saying this. What's alive in me right now is I feel that the tinge of incompletion and the sense of unresolved urgency, which is the right place to be in relation to activism. Because if activism is about movement, causing movement, then you do not want to end in a place that's balanced and complete and settled. And actually, if and when art works well and conversation works well, it leaves us in a place where we are caused to further think about it and what surfaced. So this is where and how I feel about today. We opened spaces, we opened questions. We probably did not provide sufficient answers on anything, but we brought some of the energy and the urgency of it. And if any of this is attractive and you stayed with us through the end of this conversation, you're welcome to join the other portals conversations on these and other themes. Thank you very much. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.